talking NFL draft, and here to do that with us, NFL film senior producer Greg Cosell, who has just dropped the Visine in his eyeballs. He is ready to go after grinding some more tape this morning and this afternoon. Greg, how you doing? We're only 6 days away. Are you going to fit everybody in that you want to get done between now and then?
No, I'm not. And that really bothers me, Chris. And it really does, because I'm just not going to get everybody done in the way I want to. I mean, you can always watch 20 plays of a guy, but that's not the way I do it, as you guys know. So this is really aggravating me. I'm getting into that mode where I'm just bothered. The days are getting short.
I think we call this film angst for people like Greg.
You need to get on it, because how am I going to exploit your knowledge? How am I going to exploit your knowledge if if you're not getting it done here?
Steve, how are you going to do your work if I don't get this done?
That's right. That's right. How am I going to formulate my opinion unless you do your work? Okay.
Hey, I got a question. Serious question.
Yeah.
You know the way tight ends now are used in the NFL. They want really athletic guys, right?
Right.
Do you think that Keith McKellar was sort of ahead of his time in that? If he was a guy coming out of college now, would he be viewed that way?
Yes, I think he would have been a much hotter prospect now than he was then. His problem then was he wasn't as strong as the run game. In the run game, as players are, and teams didn't throw it as much. And the running game was more of a staple, and there was less creativity offensively, because they wouldn't split him out all that often. They didn't do that with tight ends back then. They didn't use matchups like they, back then a lot of guys were still running systems instead of maximizing talent. And so, and Keith, to his credit, his ability was the impetus behind that offense changing and evolving the way it did so fast into the K gun. So he would have been a much different prospect in 2021 than he was in 1980, whenever we got him, 86, I guess. 88.
Yeah, because the run game stuff wouldn't have been seen as anywhere near as important as it was then.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's fascinating. Yeah. We know, Greg, that you put together what you feel are your top prospects in the entire draft class.
Well, that's what I did. That's what I did the other day, Chris. They might be 10 different guys now. I have no idea.
Oh, no. But I will say this. Of the top 10 that I saw, I guess the name that surprised me the most was that you had Darrisaw that high. I think most people would agree he's probably a top 20 pick for sure. But seeing him on your top 10 list, that raised my eyebrows a little bit. What is so appealing to you about Darrisaw?
I don't fancy myself, Chris, as an offensive line guru, so I don't want to come across that way for the offensive line guys who are listening. I just really, really liked his tape. I thought that he has everything you look for in a quality starting left tackle. He's got size, length, athleticism, mobility, strength. I just thought that he was the kind of guy that you look at left tackle and say, that's what I want. I mean, he's 6'5", 322, plus 34-inch arms, for those who really look at that as important. Thought he had really good balance and body control. And I always think that's really important, because even on the outside, you're not always going to look pretty. And I think when you see a guy that has very good balance and body control and can play with a firm base, that to me seems to be really important. So I really liked him both as a run blocker and as a pass protector. I think he's a really good prospect.
Yeah, I like him because he seems nimble and able to sort through bodies. And so many offensive linemen, you give him a guy and he kind of has to – he kind of gets lost after he's supposed to, help the guard, then move up. Guys get lost moving up. They move up to space. He seems to really sort through and find somebody to put a hat on. I think that's a real – I don't know, maybe an overlooked trait for me. That's what jumped out to me with Darrisaw, his ability to find the guy he's supposed to block and get up into space after him. Some of these guys just get lost trying to move to the second level.
Yeah, I just really liked him. And he made some blocks on some Khalil Herbert runs down the field that I thought were tremendous, because you have to be pretty athletic. The ability to block in space, to move, be an athlete, and then track a defender who's normally a better athlete than you are, to track a defender and strike him with balance. I think that's a really important trait, and I thought he could do that well.
Let me ask you this. I mean, you got the top 10, your top 10. I've seen the list. Give us a rundown of the top 3 guys that are not quarterbacks in this draft and how close, what kind of value you get. And because of their different positions, I get it. Give us an idea of the differences between these top 3 that may not be quarterbacks.
Well, if you're looking for non-quarterbacks, I think Kyle Pitts is the best prospect in the draft. We probably don't need to spend a lot of time on him. He's been talked about an awful lot. The only thing I'll say about him is I don't think it matters what 2 letters you put before or after his name. He's a receiver, and he's a weapon. And he can line up anywhere. So to me, he's the best pure prospect in the draft. Okay. I think Jamar Chase is a big-time wide receiver prospect. I loved his 2019 tape. I love the way in which he plays. Steve, to me, and you'll appreciate this, I'm sure, to me, the way in which he played with his competitiveness and his alpha dog mentality reminded me of Steve Smith. So I really loved Jamar Chase's tape an awful lot. He just really jumped out to me a lot. God, I'm trying to think now. I mean, in today's NFL, and I'm staying on the offensive side of the ball, in today's NFL, with the way receivers are used and the manufactured touches and the motion and the movement and lining them up all over, I think Jalen Waddle is a big-time weapon. I saw him very much like a Tyreek Hill player, and I think that's the way he can be deployed, and I think he's just a dynamic, explosive playmaker.
Yeah, and those, I mean, it'd be pretty hard to have a problem with any one of those 3 players. I was just impressed with the way Jamar Chase, even though he's like 6 feet, barely 6 foot, the way he can play above the rim. Like he plays taller than his size, which, he's got a great build to begin with. But the way he can play above the rim at just 6 feet tall is what surprises me most about his game.
It's funny you mentioned that because the other receiver who came to mind, and this goes back to last summer when I watched his tape. I watched his tape last June or July, and I think I watched 9 games. And the other receiver, and he's not quite as big, but I thought stylistically and physically, he played very similar to a DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
who is big, long, and has gigantic hands.
Right. But Hopkins, it's funny, is not necessarily as big as people think. Hopkins is not 6'3", 225.
Right.
He's not Julio Jones big.
You have the best corner you've got on your list is Patrick Surtain. And for whatever reason, a lot of people put him a little lower. Maybe it's because of his physical stature, maybe because of his skill set. How much, and I guess the higher, and knowing what I know about you and your evaluations, you put a guy higher on the list if he's scheme transcendent, so to speak. He could do a lot of things well. Is Patrick Surtain that kind of guy?
In my opinion, yes. I thought that he was just such a comfortable player. He played what we call mirror match press man, meaning that you don't physically jam the receiver off the ball. You allow him to declare his route, his release, and then you pretty much just get in his hip pocket. That's what mirror match press man is. I thought he played that as well as any corner in this draft. He reminded me, Steve, of Champ Bailey, the way in which he played that particular technique. Now, he could also be physical. He competed. He tackled in the run game. But he was just so smooth and so comfortable. Now, some people might look at the fact that he doesn't have what you'd call great long speed. Josh Palmer of Tennessee ran by him a few times, and his 40-yard time was not great. But I just think the technique with which he plays and his understanding of how to play will easily compensate for that. To me, he was the best corner prospect in the draft.
And if your scheme likes run support corners, this guy's like one of the hardest hitters at the position, I think. I mean, he hits people.
Yes, and he would come up and hit, let's say, on the screen game, too. I mean, highly competitive player. I mean, just a comfortable player. I mean, again, we know who his dad is. This guy looks like he was born to play mirror match press man.
It's interesting you mentioned the whole dad thing, because if you run down the list of corners, Greg, it's uncanny this year. Everybody's got a dad who played in the NFL, whether it's Elijah Molden, Asante Samuel,
Patrick Surtain,
J.C. Horn,
and
J.C. Horn.
And J.C. Horn.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Elijah Molden, and I was fascinated by his tape. I watched him last summer because Washington, I didn't know how many games Washington would play because the Pac-12 had announced they weren't playing, and then they did. And he only played 4 games this year, and I watched all 4 of those. But I think I watched 7 or 8 games last summer. He, to me, and I know this is a high-level comp, Chris, but he very much reminded me of Tyrann Mathieu. This kid played a ton of slot corner. He played safety. He is, to me, just a really, really good player. I hate to be cliched. I'm not that guy, as you know. I don't say things like, oh, he's got great instincts, but this kid, to me, is just a football player. And like I said, I know that's a cliche, but, I think Steve knows exactly what I mean when I say that.
Yeah, there's been, you can point to a number of guys that have come and gone, both great players and just okay guys that are that fit that kind of description. You can plug them in anywhere, all of a sudden they kind of seem like they've been playing it for a lot longer than they have, whatever position you put them in.
And I mean, he checks all the boxes. The only thing he doesn't have is long speed. So there were times when he played the slot where, let's say, a slot fade got on top of him. But he's sudden, he's explosive, he can match up man-to-man in the slot. He can play safety. They played him a ton at safety as well. So, like I said, he's a little Tyrann Mathieu. He's a little, I guess you could almost say he's got some Buda Baker in him as well, who came from the same school, University of Washington. To me, he's that kind of player.
There's another guy that plays a similar kind of role and has position flexibility, but doesn't look anything like Elijah Molden and may have the best name in the entire draft. Divine Deablo from Virginia Tech, Greg. I mean, this guy, he stands out on the field in the back 7, and I wonder if teams are going to have a tough time figuring out what he is and if that could impact his draft status somewhere on day 2.
And Chris, that's a great, great point that you made, because he was a guy that grew on me. Because, you watch him, he's over 6'3", he's 226. I mean, he looks the part. But he's not necessarily, you come away watching his tape initially going, wow, look at that guy. And then you watch more and more and more, and he plays in the box, first of all, and he's a good run defender. He can match up man-to-man on the slot. He can match up man-to-man on tight ends. Can he match up to the best tight ends? I guess we'd have to find that out. But you're right, and what you just said is what I typed in my transition. I said, maybe the bigger question is, what is he? Is he a box safety for teams who play single high? Is he a quarter safety for teams whose coverage foundation is cover 4? Do you move him to linebacker? Because you look at what the Chargers did with Kazir White, who came out of West Virginia a year ago as kind of a hybrid safety, and they moved him to linebacker. So, I'm not sure. That will be team and scheme specific, but the more I watch this kid, Chris, the more I liked him.
Yeah, I know, me too. And what about him as a big nickel? What do you think of that?
Yep. Oh, for sure. Teams that play with 3 safeties as part of their base, without question. I think you're 100. In fact, that was another note I made. I said, is he the third safety in a big nickel, the way Jaron Kearse was used with the Vikings?
Yeah.
Because Jaron Kearse, when he came out of Clemson, similar sized athlete as Deablo.
If there's going to be a guy maybe in the top 20, first of all, 2 questions. How many first-round guys do you see in this draft, talent, prospect-wise? How many guys maybe separate themselves from the second round? And which of those guys do you think is going to be maybe make a surprise jump, maybe in the top 10? Do you think there's going to be a guy like that who maybe surprises people who we thought, he's a pretty good, maybe first-round pick, and all of a sudden he's like in the top 10? Answer both those. How many first-rounders are there? And if you had to pick a guy who's going to make a big jump like that, who's it going to be?
That's a hard question for me to answer. I tell you, I can pick a guy in my mind who I think is going to end up going higher than people think. Not in the top 10, and I don't know if we've spoken about him. We may have. But I've been on this guy's bandwagon since I watched his tape maybe 7-8 weeks ago, and that's the linebacker from Kentucky, Jamin Davis. I have no idea where he'll go, but I just think this kid has everything you look for in a linebacker in today's NFL. And keep one thing in mind. Last year, the position that had more players drafted than any other position in the draft was linebacker. And that was the first time that had happened in a really, really long time. And look at this. Here's Davis right now. Look at that interception. Look at the athleticism. You're talking about a kid who's 235 pounds and over 6'3". So, and he can play. You see the athleticism and the body control and the hands when he made that pick. So, again, I'm not good at knowing where guys will go, Steve. But this was a kid, when I watched his tape, I just said to myself, you know what? This kid fits today's NFL game as a linebacker. He's a 3-down linebacker. Now, I don't know if that'll be the case day one, but it will happen.
What is your take on how big the first-round talent drops to? How many guys?
What do you mean? I don't know.
Like, how many guys would you rate as first-round grades?
Oh, I don't rate it like that, but I can tell you that any given year, there's only about 12 to 15 guys that get first-round grades, true first-round grades.
Right.
And, that becomes team-specific, obviously, because teams grade players based on their team, and what they're looking for, unless they're transcendent. I mean, obviously, every team will have Kyle Pitts and Jamar Chase high. It doesn't matter what your needs are or what scheme you run. There's certain players that are just those players. But then you start getting beyond, Steve, this top 10, top 11, and then you start getting into how teams see players. It becomes in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
The one guy I was intrigued by watching recently, Greg, was Kenny Yeboah, the old Miss tight end. He intrigues me. And then I watched the Alabama game. I almost fell out of my chair. I mean, 7 catches, 181 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, he was scorching that team. What do you make of him?
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I mean, he played 1 year in the SEC after transferring from Temple. I think he showed good play speed, Chris. I mean, he could run seam routes. He ran a lot of seam routes where no one stopped him. He literally just ran the seam and there was no one there. So, it's always hard to judge those plays and evaluate those plays. You didn't see a whole lot of route running. Like I said, he ran a lot of routes where he just ran straight and nobody picked him up. You didn't see a lot of route running. I'm curious to see if he can line up at boundary X. I think he's a good athlete. I don't know if he's a great athlete. Does he have the route and separation quickness to win? We didn't see a lot of that. What he did was he made a lot of contested catches. That trait's always essential in a league that's defined by matchup. So, I think there's something there with this kid. I don't think he's a great blocker. I think that there are times I felt like he didn't want to do it a whole lot, but there are other times I thought he did. So, you got to get him to compete all the time. But he's interesting. He'll be a day 3 guy.
Right.
But it'll be interesting to see where he goes. I've always believed, just to throw this out, that tight end production in the NFL, I mean, unless you're, such a high traits guy, and there aren't that many of those guys, becomes a function of team. Like I always felt like someone like Zach Ertz, if he went to another team that didn't feature the tight end and caught 45 balls instead of 100 balls, he'd still be the exact same player. It's just a matter of volume targets.
Yeah.
Yeah. One guy I want to ask you about, I'm down to 2 spots where the Bills they're going to pick at 30. If they pick at 30 or trade up, trade down, I don't know. But if they pick at 30, I'm thinking edge rusher or cornerback. I got to ask you about a cornerback from Stanford, Paulson Adebo. What are his traits, and how would he fit if the Bills, if there was a run on corners and the Bills thought he was the best guy left?
Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting player. He's 6'1", about 200. He's long. He's a little high cut. So he's kind of loose as an athlete, but sometimes because of the way he's high cut, he's not necessarily a sudden explosive guy. Sometimes he struggled to maintain contact at the top of the route stem in man coverage. I thought that his transition and change of direction, because of being high cut, was kind of a little segmented. Sometimes it was a little deliberate. Believe it or not, I'm curious to see if some teams will look at him as a safety prospect, but that could just be me. But, I would think that he would transition better because he was savvy and aware in zone coverage. I would think he would transition better to zone-based teams. I guess you could put the Bills into that category.
Yeah, I mean, his ball production is off the charts for the amount of time that he was.
Yep.
I mean, he was targeted a lot, and he made a lot of plays, and it's probably because of that length that you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, when you're that long, it's the hip flip that's the issue, right? Like
Yeah,
it just,
Correct. And
when you say
that showed up, but you made a great point. I mean, in my notes, and I'm I pulled them up right now. When you asked me, I made the point: excellent ball production, made plays on the ball when he had the opportunity, length and hands. I mean, his ball production was really good.
when you say high cut, that means he's got long legs, right?
Long legs. He's high cut and long legged. And what that does, Steve, as you know, is that negatively impacts transition and change of direction.
Right. It takes a long time to get yourself stopped when you got those long legs, right? Yeah.
Well, listen, Greg, we know that you'll be helping us out, hopefully during our draft streaming content, which will be coming everybody's way on draft night.
I'd love to, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. And we appreciate all of the insight on tape review that you've poured over these last few weeks to help us in the run-up to the draft. So it's been a valuable resource, and we appreciate it. So thanks for the time each and every week here.
Hey, well, when Steve's, relaxing tomorrow, Steve, just think I'll be right in my office here at Films watching tape.
And I will think about you.
Well, if you do, then you need a better life.
I do. Yeah. Well, we've been talking about that. Yes. So yeah,
he's got it pretty good, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, guys.